two bikers decided to harass a couple walking their tiny dogs on the streets of LA. They had no idea they were about to make the worst mistake of their lives. What started as a few crude jokes escalated into something far worse when one of them kicked the dogs for fun, only to realize, too late, that their target was none other than action star Jason Statham. And he wasn't about to let it slide. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the quiet streets of Venice, Los Angeles. Jason Statham adjusted the hood of his gray sweatshirt, keeping his head low as he stepped out of the house. His wife, Rosie Huntington Whiteley, followed closely behind, holding the leashes of their two miniature dachshunds, Dolly and Peggy. The tiny dogs trotted along, their short legs moving in a happy rhythm, the soft click of their nails tapping against the pavement. Jason turned to Rosie, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Are you sure this is a good idea? All of us going to the gas station together, especially with the dogs?" Rosie sighed, her patience wearing thin. "Jason, we've been over this. Dolly's been howling for hours, refusing food and water. All because that ridiculous toy of hers ran out of batteries." Jason rubbed his temple, a mix of irritation and reluctant understanding in his voice. "I get it, but we could have just ordered them online. Would it really be so bad to wait a couple of days?" Rosie shot him a knowing look. "You know how she gets." And now Peggy's starting to pick up on her anxiety. That toy is the only thing keeping them calm. Jason exhaled, shaking his head with a small smile. These two are turning into actual babies. As they started their walk, Rosie added, "It's just a quick trip. 3 blocks. In and out. No big deal." Jason still wasn't convinced. "I still think I should have just gone alone. Less chance of attracting attention." Rosie gestured to their casual outfits and the nearly empty street. "Come on, who's gonna recognize us like this? Besides, it's a beautiful evening. The dogs need fresh air, and we might even catch the sunset on the way back." Jason let out a reluctant chuckle, her optimism slowly chipping away at his tension. The evening was peaceful, the sky a canvas of soft blues and oranges. "All right," he conceded. "But let's make it quick, yeah?" Rosie smiled, slipping her arm through his as they walked. Dolly and Peggy trotted ahead, their noses to the ground, tails wagging. Jason found himself relaxing into the moment. The neighborhood was quiet, the occasional distant car horn or barking dog the only sounds breaking the tranquility. He watched as the dachshunds eagerly investigated every bush and street lamp, their tiny bodies practically vibrating with excitement. "You know," Jason mused, "I never thought I'd be the type to own small dogs. Always pictured myself with something bigger. More intimidating." Rosie laughed softly. "And yet here you are, completely wrapped around the little paws of 2 miniature dachshunds." Jason smirked, watching Peggy try, and fail, to chase a leaf. "Yeah, not exactly guard dog material." "Oh, don't underestimate them," Rosie teased. "Remember when that delivery guy came last week? Dolly barked so fiercely you'd think we had a Rottweiler." Jason chuckled. "Nearly gave the poor bloke a heart attack." As they rounded the corner, the gas station came into view. Jason still felt a twinge of apprehension. Old instincts never really faded, but Rosie's presence, along with the cheerful energy of their dogs, kept him grounded. "See?" Rosie said, nudging him playfully. "Almost there. Not so bad, was it?" Jason had to admit, despite his earlier reservations, it had been a nice walk. He was even looking forward to getting back home, spending the evening unwinding with his wife and their 2 over-pampered but well-behaved dogs. And then, out of nowhere, the peace shattered. The sudden roar of engines split the air as 2 Harleys rumbled past, their exhaust fumes choking the atmosphere. One of the bikers, a burly man with a thick beard, turned his head mid-ride and sneered. "Hey, those mob dogs look like they belong in a janitor's closet." The words hung in the air, thick with mockery. Jason's jaw tightened, his muscles tensing instantly. His earlier relaxed demeanor evaporated, replaced by something colder, sharper. He stared at the retreating bikers, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. Unbelievable. Rosie's grip on the leashes tightened. I can't believe people like that still exist, she muttered. Should we be worried? Jason's voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. In my experience, most bikers actually love animals. There are always a few bad exceptions. Rosie glanced back, then ahead toward the gas station. Maybe we should turn back, she suggested hesitantly. You were right. She didn't finish the sentence. Because at that moment, the bikers were turning around. And Jason Statham had already made up his mind. Bringing the dogs might have drawn some unwanted attention. Jason considered Rosie's words, his gaze fixed on the gas station just 2 blocks ahead. He hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. No, he said, his voice firm. Let's press on. We're almost there. Might as well finish what we started. Rosie nodded, though her unease was clear. All right, let's just hope they're gone. We'll make this quick, grab the batteries, and get out. As they continued walking, Jason kept his senses sharp, scanning their surroundings with the instinct of a man who had been in too many real-life fights to ignore red flags. Meanwhile, Dolly and Peggy remained blissfully unaware, their little tails wagging as they sniffed every street corner and lamp post. Jason tried to cut the tension. You know, he mused, I've dealt with far worse than a couple of loudmouth bikers in my films. This should be a walk in the park. Rosie managed a small smile. I know. It's just unexpected. We're so used to our quiet little bubble here. Jason nodded. Life has a way of throwing curveballs. But we'll be fine. We'll grab the batteries, and before you know it, we'll be back home, Dolly happy and her toy working again. As they neared the gas station, the sun dipped lower, casting the streets in a golden glow. On another day, it would have been a picture-perfect evening. Now, though, the lengthening shadows seemed to carry a quiet sense of foreboding. Almost there, Jason muttered, more to himself than to Rosie. Let's just hope those bikers are long gone, and we can get this over with. But Rosie's sharp intake of breath stopped him in his tracks. Jason followed her gaze. Parked just outside the station were 2 familiar Harley motorcycles. The sinking sun stretched their shadows across the pavement, making the scene feel even more ominous. Jason, Rosie whispered, slowing her steps. They're still here. Near the entrance, the 2 bikers weren't just loitering, they were harassing an elderly woman who clutched a tiny dog to her chest, trying to shield it from them. Their voices were loud, mocking, their aggressive posture making it clear they were enjoying their intimidation tactics. Rosie tugged Jason's arm. Maybe we should turn back. This doesn't look good. But Jason shook his head, his voice low and steady. We're not turning back now. If we go home empty-handed, we'll be dealing with Dolly's tantrums all night and into tomorrow. We came this far. We're finishing this. Positioning Rosie to his right, he subtly moved himself between her and the parked Harleys. Stay on my right, he murmured, his protective instincts kicking in. If anything happens, I want you behind me. As they got closer, the bikers finally noticed them. The loudmouthed one from earlier let go of the old woman, his eyes locking onto Jason and Rosie. He stepped forward, grinning as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Well, look who decided to join us, he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. Still parading those mob dogs around, huh? His friend chuckled. What do you do with him? Clean the floors or cook him up as sausages? Their laughter echoed across the parking lot, but Jason didn't flinch. Rosie, unimpressed, rolled her eyes, which only seemed to irritate the first biker further. His grin faded as he took another step forward, trying to loom over them. Hey, he growled. You know you can't bring pets into the store. Rules are rules. Jason pulled back his hoodie slightly, his expression calm but unwavering. That pet-friendly sign on the door says otherwise. Your rules don't mean anything here. The second biker's smirk faltered as recognition dawned on his face. His posture shifted from cocky to unsure. Wait a second, he squinted, then turned to his friend. Tucker, do you realize who this is? Tucker's expression twisted as he finally took a proper look at Jason. His bravado wavered, and his mouth fell slightly open. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. The second biker's attitude shifted completely. He stepped forward, suddenly all smiles, and extended a hand. I'm Vince, and this here's Tucker. We're huge fans of your work, Mr. Statham. Jason didn't shake his hand. He didn't even blink. His expression stayed cold, unreadable. Vince's grin stiffened slightly, but he pressed on, his voice turning almost apologetic. Look, man, we're sorry about earlier. If we'd known it was you, we never would've. Jason cut him off, his voice ice cold. That's the problem, he said, his words precise and deliberate. You wouldn't have done it if you knew who I was. But you did it anyway. You disrespected animals and harassed that elderly woman. That tells me everything I need to know about you. Vince glanced at Tucker, suddenly uncomfortable. Hey, come on, man, he said, forcing a chuckle. We're just trying to call a truce. No hard feelings, yeah? Maybe even grab a quick photo together? Jason didn't even hesitate. I don't take pictures with people like you. The words landed hard, cutting through the fake friendliness like a knife. Tucker's expression darkened, his earlier aggression bubbling back to the surface. He took a step closer, his fists clenching. Man, he growled, we're trying to make peace here. The least you could do is show some appreciation for your fans. Jason tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady, unreadable. You want my appreciation, he said, his voice deceptively calm. Then prove you deserve it. Tucker opened his mouth to fire back, but before he could say another word, Jason took a single step forward. And suddenly, the entire dynamic shifted. His stance changed just enough to be noticed, his posture tightening like a coiled spring. The air around him felt heavier. A silent warning. A signal that anyone with half a brain would recognize instantly. Tucker's cocky smirk flickered, hesitation creeping into his eyes. Jason didn't need to raise his voice. Didn't need to make threats. He simply let reality sink in. These two weren't standing in front of just anyone. They were standing in front of Jason Statham. And the moment they realized that, they knew they'd already lost. Jason's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. Fans, he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Fans don't harass women. Fans don't threaten dogs. Fans don't try to bully people just because they think they can get away with it. The air between them crackled with tension. Rosie, sensing how close things were to boiling over, placed a gentle hand on Jason's arm. Jason, maybe we should just go, she murmured, trying to defuse the situation. But Tucker wasn't about to let them walk away so easily. His ego, bruised by Jason's rejection, twisted into something meaner. With a sudden lunge, he grabbed Rosie's arm, his thick fingers closing around the leash. Our rules are rules, he sneered. We say no dogs in the store. Hand him over. His mistake was instant. Before Tucker could even process what was happening, Jason moved. Fast. In a single, fluid motion, Jason seized him by the collar and slammed him against the brick wall of the gas station. The force wasn't reckless, it was controlled, precise, just enough to make sure Tucker knew exactly how badly he had miscalculated. Jason's grip tightened, his strength making it clear that he could pin the much larger man there for as long as he pleased. Don't ever touch my wife. His voice was low, steady, and ice cold, carrying the kind of quiet menace that sent a chill down Tucker's spine. And here's my rule, Jason continued, his face inches from Tucker's. You run, fast, back to wherever you came from. Because if I see you still standing here when I walk out of that store, the police will be hearing about this. For a long, waited moment, the only sound was Tucker's ragged breathing. Then, finally, Jason released his grip, letting him stumble back, his face red with a mix of rage and humiliation. The sun had sunk lower, casting long, stretched-out shadows across the pavement, making the entire scene feel even more ominous. Jason turned to Rosie, his voice calm again. "Come on." He placed a reassuring hand on her back, guiding her toward the store entrance. Dolly and Peggy, usually oblivious to tension, now stayed close to their owner's feet, their small bodies unusually still. Behind them, Tucker and Vince were still stewing in their embarrassment. But Jason ignored them. He had nothing left to say to men like that. As the automatic doors slid open, the cool blast of air conditioning was almost jarring after the heat of the confrontation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a stark, artificial glow over the aisles of snacks, drinks, and car supplies. A young cashier, barely out of his teens, looked up from his magazine, his name tag reading Mike. His eyes widened as he recognized Jason and Rosie. "Good evening," he said, clearly trying to act normal but failing miserably. Jason gave him a polite nod, doing his best to shake off the tension still thrumming through his muscles. Rosie, still visibly rattled, turned to Jason. "Let's just get what we need and go," she whispered. They moved quietly through the store, gathering their supplies. Jason grabbed several packs of AA batteries, more than they actually needed. Rosie added some dog treats to their basket, along with a few snacks for themselves. Trying to lighten the mood, she glanced up at Jason. "You know," she said softly, "maybe we should have a movie night. Something with dogs in it might help get our minds off all this." Jason managed a small smirk. "Marley and me? Maybe work our way up to Lady and the Tramp?" Rosie gave him a tired but genuine smile. "Sounds like a plan." Dolly and Peggy, still sensing their owner's unease, remained unusually quiet, their little tails drooping slightly. At the checkout, Mike hesitated before speaking. Everything okay out there?" he asked, his voice cautious. His eyes flicked nervously toward the window, where Tucker and Vince could still be seen loitering near their motorcycles. Jason didn't elaborate. "It's under control." Mike nodded quickly and bagged their items, his hands moving fast. As he handed over the receipt, he leaned in slightly. "Just be careful leaving, okay? Those guys have been causing trouble around here for weeks. They don't usually let things go." Rosie gave him a grateful nod, tightening her grip on the dog's leashes. Jason, silent, simply took the bags in one hand and wrapped his other arm protectively around Rosie's shoulders as they headed for the exit. They paused just before the doors, scanning the parking lot. Empty. The bikes were gone. The tension in the air eased just a little as Jason and Rosie stepped outside, the cooler evening air washing over them. Rosie exhaled, looping her arm through Jason's as they started their walk home. "Thank God that's over," she whispered. Dolly and Peggy, oblivious to just how close things had come to getting ugly, happily trotted ahead, their little tails wagging once more. But as Jason glanced over his shoulder one last time, something told him. This wasn't over yet. Jason nodded as he walked, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning their surroundings. The gas station's pump area was cast in long, jagged shadows as the setting sun painted eerie contrasts of light and dark across the pavement. The rhythmic click of Dolly and Peggy's nails against the sidewalk was a small comfort against the tense silence hanging between him and Rosie. After a moment, Rosie spoke again, her voice low. "Do you think they really took your warning seriously? Will they leave us alone?" Jason's response was measured but realistic. "Hard to say," he admitted. "Police rarely act on animal-related complaints unless there's serious injury involved. But I'm hoping my warning was enough of a deterrent." They kept walking, trying to focus on the rhythmic sounds of the evening, the distant hum of passing cars, the occasional bark from a dog in a nearby yard. It was supposed to be a simple walk. A quick errand. But Jason's instincts were screaming at him now. Movement flickered in his peripheral vision. His body tensed. The bikers. Their motorcycles were now parked at a distance. They weren't approaching. Not yet. but their presence alone was enough to set Jason on edge. Rosie noticed his sudden shift and followed his gaze. Her grip on his arm tightened slightly. "Maybe we should cross the street," she suggested, her voice unsteady. "Take another way home." Jason considered it for a moment before shaking his head. "No," he said firmly. "The sun's going down, and I don't want to show them we're afraid. We keep walking. Just stay close to me." Rosie nodded, though the unease never left her face. They kept moving, forcing themselves not to look, not to acknowledge the men watching them. Dolly and Peggy, usually full of energy, now walked close to their owners, ears low, tails stiff. Then, just as they passed the parked Harleys, thinking, hoping, they might make it home without another incident, Tucker moved. Fast. With a sharp, sudden motion, he lashed out, his heavy boot aiming straight for the dogs. Jason reacted instantly. He shoved Rosie aside, yanking back on the leashes, but Tucker's boot still connected with Peggy. The tiny dachshund let out a sharp yelp of pain. And then, before anyone could react, Peggy struck back. A snarl ripped from her tiny frame, and in an instant, she latched onto Tucker's boot, her teeth sinking into the leather with the force of an animal 10 times her size. Chaos erupted. Tucker cursed loudly, stumbling as he tried to shake her off. Rosie gasped, instinctively pulling Dolly back while Jason moved between her and the bikers. Bystanders turned, startled by the commotion. The peaceful evening shattered in an instant. "Damn mutt!" Tucker roared, his face red with fury as he tried to kick his foot free. "You ruined my boot." Despite the seriousness of the moment, Rosie couldn't stop herself. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp with a mix of fear and pride. "Dachshunds may be small, but they're fearless. You should have known better than to try and hurt them." Jason finally managed to pry Peggy away, cradling her trembling body as she continued to growl, her little chest heaving with adrenaline. Tucker's thick leather boot had protected him from injury, but his pride was clearly another story. Enraged, he lifted his foot again, this time aiming for Dolly. Jason's voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Don't you dare." His tone was lethal, his eyes locked onto Tucker like a predator sizing up its prey. In one hand, he held his phone. "Try it again, and the police will hear about this." For a moment, it looked like Tucker might press his luck. But the mention of the police made him hesitate. His foot slowly lowered. Then Vince stepped forward. Whatever fake friendliness he had tried to show earlier was gone. His eyes burned with a different kind of anger now, one laced with resentment. "You've taken this to another level," he spat. Jason didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stared, waiting. Vince's lip curled. "We were offering you peace. A picture. Because we liked your movies. But you treated us like dirt. Like we were beneath you." Then he paused, and his expression shifted, slowly twisting into something darker. A slow, cruel grin spread across his face. "You think you're high and mighty, huh? You think your celebrity status keeps you safe? Let me tell you something, Statham, it won't. Because we know where you live." The threat landed like a punch to the gut. Rosie inhaled sharply, her hand tightening around the dog leashes. Jason's jaw clenched, his mind racing through their options. A long, heavy silence followed. Then Jason spoke. His voice was low. Steady. "If you were real men," he said, his gaze locked onto Vince's, "you'd settle this man to man." Vince and Tucker exchanged a look. Then Vince sneered. "Our biker gang isn't just a gang, it's a pack. And a pack stays together." Jason exhaled slowly. He was done with their posturing. "What do you propose?" The bikers grinned. A predatory gleam flickered in their eyes. "Meet us here. 4 a.m. tomorrow." Jason didn't blink. "And?" Vince's grin widened. "Bring your dogs. We'll take you to a secret location." A little challenge. Tucker let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Let's see how your little mops fare against real dogs. Rosie's protests were immediate. Absolutely not, she snapped, stepping forward, her voice shaking with a mix of fury and fear. We are not putting our dogs in danger for your sick games. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. Her gaze darted down to Dolly and Peggy, who were now huddled close to her feet, their small bodies still trembling. But to her shock, her complete disbelief, Jason nodded, his expression unreadable. We'll be there. Jason's voice was calm. Too calm. It was the kind of steady, unwavering tone that made it clear there was no room for debate. The words hung in the air like a verdict, final and absolute. Rosie's face twisted in disbelief as she took a step toward him, her pulse hammering in her ears. Jason, what the hell are you thinking? She hissed, lowering her voice as if the bikers might still be within earshot. This isn't some stupid dare. This is our dogs' lives we're talking about. But Jason didn't answer. He simply turned on his heel and walked away, his hands buried deep in his hoodie pockets. Rosie's stomach twisted in frustration. Her repeated questions, sharp, desperate, fell on deaf ears as they made their way home. His silence only made her anger burn hotter. She quickened her pace to match his, her voice rising. Do you even care what happens to them? She snapped. Do you have any idea what you just agreed to? Jason remained quiet, his jaw tight, his gaze locked straight ahead. The tension between them crackled like a live wire, unspoken words thick in the air. As they walked, the sun dipped lower, its golden glow fading into creeping shadows. The neighborhood, usually familiar and safe, felt different now. Every rustling leaf, every distant rev of an engine made Rosie flinch, her eyes darting over her shoulder. Jason, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. His steps were steady, purposeful. But even he glanced back occasionally, subtle, cautious movements that told Rosie he wasn't as calm as he pretended to be. The dogs trotted close to their sides, no longer eager and playful, but tense, picking up on the unease in the air. Rosie gripped their leashes tighter, her knuckles white. She cast another glance at Jason, her expression a mix of fear and frustration. By the time they reached their house, the colors of the sunset had faded into muted grays. The streetlights flickered to life, casting long, eerie shadows against the pavement. Rosie fumbled with the keys, her fingers trembling slightly as she cast one last wary glance over her shoulder before stepping inside. Jason followed, locking the door behind them. He didn't stop there. He did a full perimeter check, scanning the windows, making sure they hadn't been followed. Only when he was satisfied did he finally speak. You owe me an explanation, Rosie demanded, her voice unsteady. Why would you agree to this? What the hell are you planning? Jason exhaled, finally breaking his silence. I know you're worried, he said, his voice soft but firm. But I need you to trust me. Accepting that challenge wasn't about playing into their game. It was about preventing immediate danger. Rosie's eyes widened. What do you mean? How does agreeing to meet those thugs again, with our dogs, no less, prevent danger? Jason moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to scan the darkened street. If I had refused, they might have followed us home tonight. He let the words settle. This way, we bought ourselves time. Despite his explanation, Rosie still looked horrified. But surely, you're not actually planning on going through with it. You're not seriously thinking about risking our dogs in some twisted fight. Jason shook his head. And for the first time since the encounter, a small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Of course not. Rosie blinked. Then what? I have no intention of fighting. Dog or otherwise. Jason's expression hardened. I have a better plan. Rosie exhaled, her posture relaxing slightly, but concern still clouded her eyes. What kind of plan? Jason's gaze didn't waver. I'm going to settle this tonight. Rosie's eyes widened in alarm. Tonight? Jason, that's too dangerous. We should call the police, let them handle it. Jason shook his head. The police can't do much without concrete evidence. And if we involve them now, we might just escalate things. Piss them off even more. Rosie bit her lip, uncertainty flashing across her face. But slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. I trust you, she whispered. Just be careful, okay? Jason gave her a reassuring smile, pressing a kiss to her forehead before heading toward the door. I will. Lock up behind me. And don't open the door for anyone. Rosie nodded, watching as he stepped out into the cool evening air. Inside, Dolly and Peggy played, their soft paws tapping against the floor, oblivious to the storm brewing outside. The contrast between their innocence and the tension in Jason's gut only strengthened his resolve. This needed to end. Quietly. Quickly. His first stop? The gas station. The same cashier from earlier was still on duty, his magazine in hand. He looked up in surprise as Jason entered. Mr. Statham? His brows knitted with concern. Everything okay? Jason nodded, keeping his tone casual. Yeah. Just forgot something earlier. A pause. Say, those bikers who were causing trouble. Do you know anything about them? Where they might hang out? The cashier's expression darkened. Oh, them? Yeah. They're bad news. Their clubhouse isn't far from here, moved into the neighborhood recently. Been causing nothing but trouble. Jason nodded slowly. Good. That's exactly what he needed to know. Because tonight, he was going to pay them a visit. Jason's interest was piqued. You wouldn't happen to know exactly where their clubhouse is, would you? The cashier hesitated, then lowered his voice. Just a few streets over. Big place with a gate, can't miss it. Got some kind of wolf logo on it. Thanking him, Jason followed the directions and soon spotted the clubhouse. The iron wolves insignia loomed over the gate, solidifying his resolve. He knew showing up unannounced was a risk, but he was confident in his ability to handle whatever awaited him. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the buzzer. The loud chime echoed through the quiet night. Silence. Then, a gruff voice crackled through the intercom. Who's there? Jason leaned in. Jason Statham. I need to speak with your leader about what happened at the gas station. A pause. Then, a note of surprise, maybe even excitement, crept into the voice. Jason Statham? The actor? Hold on. The gate slid open with a mechanical hum. As Jason stepped onto the property, he spotted movement inside the large house that served as the clubhouse. Shadows flickered behind windows. Voices grew louder. The front door swung open, revealing a tattooed man in his late 30s with a powerful build. Despite his intimidating presence, his face lit up with recognition. Mr. Statham, he greeted, extending a hand. I'm Nero. Welcome. Didn't expect a celebrity visit tonight. Jason shook his hand, his expression neutral. Thanks for seeing me on short notice. Hope I'm not interrupting. Nero waved off the concern. Not at all. The boys will be thrilled to meet you. Inside, Jason found himself in a large open space, part lounge, part bar. Leather couches lined the walls, a massive TV flickered in the background, and dozens of leather-clad bikers turned to stare, their conversation dying at the sight of him. Nero called out, Hey, someone get Pre. As Jason walked through the room, he mentally noted every exit, the layout, and the demeanor of the men. Most seemed genuinely excited, but he remained cautious. Then, a figure entered. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Exuding quiet authority. I'm Pre, the man said, his voice deep and commanding. To what do we owe the honor of your visit, Mr. Statham? Before Jason could respond, the doors burst open. Tucker and Vince stormed in, their faces twisted with rage. What the hell is he doing here? Tucker barked. We had an agreement. Vince sneered. Yeah, he was supposed to meet us tomorrow, not sneak into our clubhouse. The room tensed. Pre raised a hand, silencing them. His gaze sharpened as he looked at Jason. Agreement? Jason met his eyes steadily. I came to clear up a misunderstanding, and to address the behavior of these two earlier today. Tucker's face reddened. Misunderstanding? We were just teaching him a lesson. Jason's voice remained level. Is that so? Why don't you explain to your leader what this lesson involved? How you harassed my wife and tried to kick my dogs? A hush fell over the room. Priest's expression darkened. His gaze snapped to Tucker and Vince. Is this true? Tucker hesitated, then shrugged. We were just having a bit of fun. Putting on a tough act for the neighborhood. Vince added quickly, besides, they weren't even real dogs. Just little sausage-shaped mops. That did it. Priest's eyebrows shot up. He turned to Jason, a mix of confusion and amusement playing across his face. Wait, the aggressive dogs you were talking about were dachshunds? Jason nodded. Miniature dachshunds, to be precise. Our family pets. Pre blinked. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. You mean to tell me, he said, barely containing his amusement, that you two got bitten by a dachshund and were planning to pit Rottweilers against them? The room erupted in laughter. Chuckles turned into full-blown howls. Tucker and Vince's faces burned with humiliation. Hey, I love dachshunds, Nero called out. They're fearless little things. Other bikers murmured in agreement. The shift was immediate. Tucker and Vince were no longer the tough guys in the room. They were a joke. Then, Priest's laughter faded, his expression hardening. This behavior does not represent our club, he said, his voice like steel. We may be bikers, but we have a code. We don't harass families. We don't harm animals. His gaze snapped back to the two men. As for you two, you've disgraced this club. Return your rings. You're out. The room fell silent. Tucker's jaw dropped. But Pre. Now. With trembling hands, Tucker and Vince removed their iron wolves rings and placed them in Priest's palm. As they shuffled toward the exit, heads low, the rest of the club watched in stony silence. Only when they were gone did Pre turn back to Jason. I apologize for what you and your family went through today. That's not what we stand for. Jason nodded. I appreciate that. It takes a strong leader to handle things the right way. Pre extended a hand. Thanks for giving us the chance to make it right. As they shook hands, the atmosphere shifted. Other members approached Jason, eager to talk. The tension was gone, replaced by unexpected camaraderie. Nero grinned. You know, Mr. Statham, we're not just about motorcycles. We do pet adoption events, fundraisers for shelters. Maybe you and your family would like to attend one sometime? Jason raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Pre nodded. Absolutely. And hey, if your dachshunds ever want to meet some new friends, my bulldog loves playing with small dogs. Jason chuckled. I'll keep that in mind. As he stepped out into the cool night air, he felt a sense of satisfaction. What had started as a threat had turned into something unexpected, an alliance. Pulling out his phone, he called Rosie. Jason? Her voice was anxious. Everything okay? He smiled. Better than okay. You're not gonna believe what happened. As he walked home, he recounted the night's events. Rosie listened in stunned silence, then finally said, amusement creeping into her voice. So let me get this straight. We've been invited to a biker club's pet playdate. Jason laughed. Life's full of surprises, huh? A pause. Then Rosie's warm laughter came through the phone. Why not? After all this, Dolly and Peggy deserve some new adventures. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Next time we need batteries, let's just order them online. Jason chuckled as he approached home, the glow of the porch light welcoming him back. The night had taken an unexpected turn, but in the end, it had brought new connections, unlikely friendships, and most importantly, peace.